I'm Fraser Lashinger, and I'm sitting here in the old Grand Trunk Railway Station in Prescott, Ontario. This station was built in 1855 to service the new Grand Trunk Railway, which was chartered in 1853 by the Canadian government.
The Grand Trunk was the single biggest investment by British investors in any offshore company in the entire empire. When it was built, it was the largest railway in the world. It extended from Portland, Maine on the Atlantic Ocean, through Montreal, through Prescott, down to Toronto, and on to Sarnia, Ontario. Now, initially, there had been a scheme to build a railway from Montreal to Kingston, called the Montreal and Kingston Railway. It was chartered in 1850, and it was going to meet up with another railway company, which was the Kingston and Toronto, which were going to complete the distance. However, when the Canadians went to England to raise the necessary funds to build the railway, the contractors, the firm of Pato, Brassey, Jackson and Betts, which was one of the largest railway contractors on the planet at the time, said, why don't we put all this together and we will build the railway for you as an entire package, and we will build all across the colony, hopefully even down to the Maritimes, because they're busy in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick dealing with the provincial governments there on the need for a railway.
The construction started then, and it was financed in part through a government subsidy. In 1849, the government had passed the Guarantee Act, which provided subsidies on half of the bonds raised to finance railways in Upper and Lower Canada if they were longer than 75 miles. And the Grand Trunk Railway certainly qualified, as it was going to extend over 1,000 miles from the east coast to Sarnia.
So the Canadians agree to this. They consolidate all the railways that they had chartered into the Grand Trunk Railway in 1852, and in 1855 the rail line is opened from Montreal through Prescott to Brockville, which is the terminus for that year. Now the railway was overbuilt in some ways for its purposes, and it was certainly underbuilt for others. The Grand Trunk was noted for building superb stations. They used lovely cut limestone in their station buildings, giving very impressive entrances to the communities at many points along the line. However, because they were cutting corners on funding, the infrastructure, the track structure particularly, was not of the highest quality and gave almost perpetual problems from the days the railways were opened. The station in Prescott is one of the larger stations that were built by the Grand Trunk at the time. It remained open until 1865, when the station was closed. Most Prescottians do not know this, but the Grand Trunk also had a separate station at the point called Prescott Junction, just less than a mile away from the Stone Prescott station. And this was the point where passengers would change from the Grand Trunk trains to the St. Lawrence and Ottawa trains to go to the nation's capital. The Grand Trunk decided, after it had taken over the St. Lawrence and Ottawa in 1865, that it would consolidate stations, because now it had Prescott Junction, it had its Prescott station, and there was the St. Lawrence and Ottawa station down by the harbor, which were really one station too many for the size of the community. So they closed their Stone station, moved their clerks down to the harbor, and they ran a shuttle passenger train between the harbor station and Prescott Junction to meet the main line trains. The expresses going between Montreal, Toronto, and the border would stop at Prescott Junction, do their work, and then go right by the old Stone station that still exists today. Okay, so in 1880, they moved back to the old station. There's been complaints from Prescott that the station out at the junction is just inconvenient, and making the transfer to complete the last mile to come into town was rather awkward for a lot of people. So the Grand Trunk agrees to this. The station, they also are going to lose control of the St. Lawrence and Ottawa in 1881 as the battle starts between CP and the Grand Trunk over the property, which of course they won't win. The St. Lawrence and Ottawa actually begins running its trains to the Grand Trunk station in 1880 as well. So the Harbourfront station is very ill used. Everyone is using the Stone station for the time. But once CP gets control, St. Lawrence and Ottawa, the trains on that line move back to the harbour, and the Grand Trunk just uses its own station.
And the CNR, I guess it was known as Grand Trunk Railway.
Yeah.
And at one time, the CNR was supposed to be a focal station in Prescott, and they said the plans went down with the Titanic. Now I don't know.
Yes, that's a true story.
And the only person I really knew on the CNR was Alec Banford. He was, I think, the station agent up there in the 1960s and 70s.
Now the Grand Trunk, of course, becomes the Canadian National Railways when it's taken over by the federal government in 1923, and it's used by CN and VIA until the station is closed for passengers, and in 2007 it's acquired by the Grenville County Historical Society and now serves as their headquarters buildings. It's probably the earliest extant station in Canada. It was built in 1855. I have a copy of the notice that went out to contractors to erect the stations, and certainly it's in good hands right now.
Now, what I have before me are some of our artifacts from our collection in the archives here at the Grenville County Historical Society. You'll see that as these are very old documents, they're all preserved in plastic to keep them from damage. And some of the ones that I have in hand here, and there goes the train, are the waybills and notices on different shipments that took place over the years. Most of these documents relate to the Grand Trunk Railway system, which was the railway that operated out of this station that we're currently sitting in. The first one I'm looking at is dated 1891, and it's a Grand Trunk Railway waybill for a trunk, one trunk and one barrel. $40 paid on freight. So that was an expensive shipment. The second document I have is dated 1906 and is made out to the King Edward Hotel in Latchford, and it contained 20 cases of whiskey. At the bottom, J.P. Weiser and Sons. So the whiskey obviously was a big item of trade out of Prescott in the latter part of the 19th century, and there is some of the proof to show shipments being made out of here.